It's hard to believe it, but the fantasy football playoffs are almost here. Now, if you're one of the owners that has been lucky enough to wrap up a spot in the playoffs, congratulations on a successful season so far. But a lot of you out there have had a miserable season for one reason or another: disappointment, underperforming players, injuries. It doesn't matter. But to get through these tough times, I highly recommend you go open up your Spotify app on your phone and put on the famous song by Jay-Z where he says, "I've got 99 problems and fantasy football is every single one." Headliner Nation, what's going on? Welcome back to the Fantasy Headliners. Kyle coming to you with this week's quarterback start and sit episode, looking at every single matchup for week 12 of the NFL season. Being completely transparent, let's take a look at the numbers from last week for quarterbacks. At 65%, again, that goal for me is 70% every single week, which is a lot when you're looking at every single matchup. However, we're going to get back there. This is a lot better than it's been the last couple of weeks, though, so glad to be back up a little bit higher. However, a lot of work to still do this season. So let's get ready to jump into it. Let's talk about every quarterback from every matchup in Week 12. First matchup of the week on Thursday Night Football is division rivals Indianapolis and Houston facing off in an important matchup. And in this matchup, I've got both quarterbacks starting. Now for Jacoby Brissett, I've got him in the lineup this week because Houston is giving up the 6th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. For Deshaun Watson, we're going to put him in the lineup every single week. However, this week, I just encourage you, Deshaun Watson owners, to not set your expectations too high. Indianapolis has played pretty well this year, especially against the pass. They've given up the 5th fewest passing yards in the league this season. So we need a lot of touchdowns from Deshaun Watson this week to really prop up his value. The volume might not be necessarily as high as it has been in weeks past, but we're still going to put him as a quarterback one this week. I just think we're going to be a little bit more on the mid to lower end of the spectrum there. In Week 12, if you own Matt Ryan, you're putting him in your lineup. And it's a very simple why. Tampa Bay gives up more points per game to opposing quarterbacks than a 10-year-old playing basketball with the dad that thinks if his high school coach put him in during the championship game, they would have won. On the flip side, though, for Tampa Bay, we are sitting Jameis Winston this week. Since coming back from the bye, Atlanta's defense has been on fire. They have allowed the 5th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks over the last 2 weeks. Not trusting Winston this week. We are 100% trusting Ryan this week, and very clear that he could potentially be the quarterback one in Week 12. In this matchup, we're definitely going to throw Josh Allen into our starting lineup this week. Since the Bills' bye, he is the quarterback 2 in fantasy football, and he has not thrown an interception over his last 5 games. It's clear that he is growing as a passer, he's growing as a quarterback, and the results are showing. He gets a tough Denver defense this week in terms of the passing game. However, he still could come out as a quarterback one, and I think he does. On the flip side, though, for Brandon Allen in Denver, not going to be considering him this week. The Bills' defense gives up the 4th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. You can just move along from this matchup. Nothing to see here. With Daniel Jones, he plays good against defenses that he should play good against. For defenses that are a little bit more tough, though, Jones just hasn't been able to figure it out or stay consistent as of yet. And against the Chicago Bears defense that gives up the 9th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, it could be a tough week for him. For Mitchell Trubisky, even after a hip injury last week, it sounds like he's going to be on the field this Sunday against the Giants. And even though this is a juicy matchup that you want to take advantage of, I'm not going to try it this week. If my fantasy season is on the line, I would much rather take a blindside hit from Khalil Mack than put Mitchell Trubisky in my lineup. Go ahead and skip on him this week and find a better option that could be more reliable with more upside. Yeah, I might be a little bit insane, but even after a horrible performance against the Browns last week, where Mason Rudolph almost had his Kappa detated by Myles Garrett, tell me if you know where that quote is from, I'm still going to go ahead and start him this week against Cincinnati, who is giving up the 4th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. 3rd most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. think could end up being a little bit of bounce back this week. They are going to probably win this game, as they should, against a team that is 0-10. So let's go ahead and roll out Mason Rudolph if you absolutely have no other options. Now, there are some better options this week, but there are also a lot of bad options as well. So this is definitely a streaming option that you could take a look at. If you need to find somebody with a little bit more upside, Rudolph could potentially have some of that this week if James Conner cannot go. Now, with the other side of the ball, Ryan Finley, not even considering him. There's absolutely no upside to playing him. I would much rather play Rudolph before ever considering Finley. For this matchup, I got both of these quarterbacks starting this week. With Ryan Fitzpatrick, a big game can come out of nowhere, and I'm feeling like we might get a little Ryan Fitzmagic this week against the Cleveland Browns. So we're going to go ahead and roll with him this week. For Mayfield, over the last few games, 70 for 112, 704 yards, 5 touchdowns, no interceptions. He's getting a lot better. Out of nowhere, the Cleveland Browns have decided to finally turn it on a little bit. Miami gives up the 5th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. Could end up being a very good weekend for the Cleveland Browns. Nope. Never again. Mention Kyle Allen to me and putting him in my starting lineup, I'm going to laugh and walk away. For the rest of the season, I can guarantee you Kyle Allen is going to be over there in the sit column. I'm not doing it anymore with this guy. If he has a good game, great. I don't care. He's going in the sit column no matter what. Not even worrying about it. However, for Drew Brees, not the case. We're going to continue to roll Drew Brees out there. Outside of the Atlanta game, where he had some difficulties, since his return after injury, 6 touchdowns and 1 interception. That game against Atlanta, no touchdowns, no interceptions. So he's been pretty good over the last 3 weeks. We're going to continue to roll him out, especially at home. When they're in the Superdome, you're putting him in. Oakland and New York is going to be a matchup of the quarterbacks that aren't going to do a whole lot to get you excited, but do just enough to help you get a win. Derek Carr, we're going to start him this week. He's been playing very well, very, very well. Jets allowing just over 18 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. Carr isn't winning any MVPs. He's not winning you any championships in your fantasy football league, but he's doing just enough that you don't have to worry about the quarterback position if you have him. For Sam Darnold, Oakland allows 20 fantasy points or 20 plus fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. We're going to forget what Phillip Rivers did against the Oakland Raiders. They have allowed 400 or plus yards twice this season. So at any point in time, this is a defense that can give up a lot of yards. Now, I'm not saying Sam Darnold is going to throw for 400 yards. However, this could be a really back and forth game this week. Sam Darnold could end up having to throw it a lot. If you own MVP candidate Russell Wilson, well, he's going to be in your lineup every single week, so continue to deploy him as such. For Carson Wentz, his team is far too banged up. He's been far too inconsistent, and he hasn't had nearly enough upside this year. Yes, you could put him in. You're not going to get an overwhelming performance. You're not going to get a performance that's going to help you win your fantasy matchup. More than likely, you'll get one that will just keep you from losing. However, he just hasn't done nearly enough in this matchup. I'm not going to trust him. I'm going to go ahead and move on from him, especially with some of the injuries that they're dealing with right now. Let's go ahead and rewind it to right before week 1 kicked off. I'm going to go back in time. I'm going to say, Kyle, just to let you know, in week 12, you're going to have Jeff Driscoll as a start for the Detroit Lions against the Washington Redskins. I would have kicked myself right where the sun don't shine and said, get out of here. But that's where we're at with this crazy fantasy football season. We're starting Jeff Driscoll against the Washington Redskins here in week 12. And the reason for that is because he hasn't looked that bad since taking over. The one thing that has helped him in his fantasy points a little bit are his rushing yards. He scrambles and has been scrambling quite often. So he picks up a few extra points on the ground for you. So keep an eye on that against the Redskins this weekend. Now for the Redskins, I'm not going to be starting Dwayne Haskins because I think we're going to see a ton of Darius Geist this weekend. Adrian Peterson didn't practice as of today, as of this recording on Wednesday. However, with that being said, AP could still end up suiting up. If he does, expect a lot of back and forth between the two. But I think they're going to run the ball a ton against the Lions this weekend, and they're probably going to rack up some decent yards as well. So I think they're going to leave it on the ground and try to beat the Lions that way. Haskins, he could turn the ball over once or twice. Maybe he throws a touchdown. Not going to have a whole lot of yards. He's been far too inconsistent and has too many turnovers so far. Honestly, this was one of my more difficult matchups to try and predict for this weekend. Ryan Tannehill, I like him. I like him a lot. He's done a really good job. However, I think we're going to see a ton of Derrick Henry this week, and I think Derrick Henry is going to be super efficient this week as well. I don't think Ryan Tannehill is going to have that great of a game. Now, you just automatically assume with Jacksonville sometimes, oh, Jalen Ramsey isn't there anymore. They haven't played well. However, they have played pretty well in the passing game. Jacksonville has only allowed more than 200 yards 5 times this season. And over the last 3 weeks, they haven't given up 200 yards in the passing game to any quarterback. So they've been playing well as of late. So I don't love Ryan Tannehill this week. That's why I'm going to list him as a sit. Now, for Nick Foles, I originally had him listed as a sit, but I thought about it, and he played well last week. It wasn't great, out of this world performance, but that connection that he has with DJ Chark right now is a little too much to just look away from. Tennessee has a good defense. Leonard Fournette hasn't been super effective this year. He has a ton of volume, but the efficiency hasn't been there. I think they're going to have to throw it a little bit this weekend, and that's why Nick Foles is going to end up being a start for me. It could go either way. It's going to be really, really close. He's going to be probably on the lower end of my start list when it comes to who I'm ranking. However, I still will roll with him this week if I need to. A great matchup coming in New England this weekend, Dallas and New England. And with Dak Prescott, we're not going to sit him. A lot of people are spooked right now because of that defense in New England. But Dak has just been way too good this year. I mean, if Russell Wilson were going into New England, would you sit him? No, you wouldn't. And Dak Prescott has been playing just as well as Russell Wilson this year. We got to give him some of that love. It could end up being a game where he doesn't have nearly as much upside. However, I'm going to trust him on the road this week. And with Tom Brady, we're going to continue to trust that guy every single week. There's not too many weeks that we're going to go ahead and sit him. But when you get a home game in the middle of a playoff push like they are right now, I'm going to go ahead and roll with Tom Brady. All right, so maybe this is one of my surprises this week. Yes, I've listed Mason Rudolph as a start and Aaron Rodgers as a sit this week. Now, before you shut the video off or hurl some awful comments my way, Packers fans, settle down a little bit, okay? Rodgers is definitely going to be a sit for me this week against San Francisco. And let me tell you why, okay? Rodgers has been pretty inconsistent this season. In weeks 1 through 6, he was the QB 14. Not too bad, but outside of QB1 status. For weeks 7 and 8, he was the quarterback 1. Great matchups, a game with 5 touchdowns, play extremely well. Weeks 9 and 10, quarterback 22. So it has been a roller coaster. He gets the San Francisco 49ers defense that allows 10.9 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, second fewest in the National Football League. Definitely see a tough time on the road in San Francisco this week. For Jimmy Garoppolo, I'm also going to list him as a sit. I think this is going to be all run game for San Francisco this week. I know they're a little bit banged up. However, I think you're going to see a massive amount of running. They're going to get back to the running game that they had more towards the middle of the season, a few weeks back, because Green Bay is giving up the 3rd most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. So I think you're going to see a lot of running, and that's going to neutralize Jimmy Garoppolo's upside a little bit. Primetime on Monday Night Football means primetime Lamar Jackson this week. Excited to watch him on Monday Night Football. A chance for a lot of people who don't normally get to watch the Ravens or only get to see some highlights, see an entire game for Lamar Jackson. I think the guy is going to show up and be a stud this week. However, on the flip side, for Jared Goff, we're going to put him as a sit. The Baltimore Ravens defense has not allowed a 300-yard passer since week 4, and only one quarterback has gone over 250 yards in the last 6 games. So their defense is playing very well right now. Jared Goff has been too inconsistent. The offense for the Rams as a whole has been inconsistent. We're not going to trust him this week. There you have it. Quarterback start and sit in the books for week 12. In the comments below, I want to know how you all are doing. We see some of you from time to time post what your records are. I want to know in the comments, how are your fantasy football teams doing? Are you in the playoffs? Are you on the outside looking in and you need a push right now? Have you just given up all hope and you're just here because you love the content? Whatever it may be, let me know how your fantasy teams are going. If this is your first time watching this video on the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Become a part of Headliner Nation today. Hit the bell notification so anytime we drop content or go live, you know, and of course, hit the like button on the video. Headliner Nation, have a great one. I'll see you on the next episode. Have a good one.